Welcome to Explore, Explain. This is a long-form video and podcast series sharing conversations with data visualization designers and developers from around the world. Each episode explores the detailed hidden thinking behind a single project or a series of related works to explain the what, the why, and the how of the design process. So let's jump in to today's episode with your host, Andy Kirk.
Hello and welcome to another Explore, Explain episode, a very special episode. We are in real life today in the FT offices in London with my special guest for this finale, Alan Smith. Hi Alan.
Hi Andy.
Thank you very much for the invite today to talk about a brilliant project. I'm so excited about this conversation. So today we're filming in the offices because we're going to show you some stuff. So this will be both published as an audio episode for people to listen to, but there'll be some extra bonus footage for those watching on the YouTube video, so I'll let you choose your adventure on that front. So maybe just to start with, Alan, can you give people a sense of who you are, what you do here at FT HQ?
Who am I indeed? Firstly, thanks for having me on, Andy. I'm a big fan of Explore, Explain, so it's great to be a season finale.
Nice to meet a fan.
Season finale, as I've described it. So I lead the visual and data journalism team at the FT. That is a group of about 35 people at the FT, most of whom are in London, but we have a few people in New York and one in Hong Kong. That looks after just a huge range of visual and data related editorial content at the FT. But my origins, really, my background is in data visualization. That's how we first met those years ago, whenever that was. The great thing about being at the FT is you have access to not only great talent and kind of skills to do really interesting projects, but also just a network of really interesting people that you can suddenly come up with crazy projects like this to get involved in. Yeah.
And crazy project it is, and I'll let you hold up the device that we're going to be referring to shortly as I just sort of give a little bit of context. So it's a bit of a departure today because, as you'll see on the video, we're looking at a project developed in an Apple Vision Pro. So again, this does translate to audio to a degree, but it's why we've also got some bonus footage later on in the video version. And this is, from what I understand, the FT's first mixed reality app on the Apple Vision Pro marketplace, I guess it might be the term. And it's the project titled the FT Money Machine. And this is something that I know that you are terrifically passionate about and correctly proud of. It was published, I think, I'm right in saying, in September this year.
Yeah.
But traces back to many years ago. Not continuous time, of course. Maybe to begin with, can you just give people, especially those listeners who can't and won't see this right now, a sense of what this product is? What have you built?
Okay, yeah, sure. So this project delivers a sort of faithful reworking of a 75-year-old analog computer that models the UK economy. And that analog computer, what I mean by that is no electronics.
Yeah.
There's obviously electronics in our version because it's been reproduced in Apple Vision Pro, but the original machine solved 9 differential equations to simulate the flow of money around the economy solely through pumping water through pipes and sluices.
Yeah.
So it's a remarkable machine. Like I say, developed in 1949, so it's about 75 years old. And it's incredibly rare because there's only 3 of these things left anywhere in the world. So we thought this would be a great candidate for digital preservation.
Yeah.
I think you'll go into the Science Museum later and you'll get to see one of the originals in its kind of glory. But it's one of those things that we think still is a hugely important landmark in analog computing, which, we've largely moved on from, but there's still plenty to learn from that space. But also that there's things that we can do with this and learn from that really suggest some interesting directions for the future of data viz. Right? In some senses, what I love about this project compared to anything else I've ever been involved with before is it's almost perfectly symmetrical in terms of being historical and forward-looking at the same time.
Yeah. And also, as we'll explore, there are imposed restrictions in terms of preserving as we'll see later on, the look and feel material of the original. But then it's in the context of complete freedom that you can then. So you're right. There's lots of sort of paradigms that it kind of balances across. And yeah, we'll be going to it. So myself and Obina, say hello, Obina, loudly.
Hello.
There we go. We'll be going later on to record some footage of the piece, which isn't a working piece at the Science Museum in London. The working piece is in Cambridge, at the University of Cambridge. So this was, and I think we'll bring up some visuals as well. This was developed by a New Zealand student from the London School of Economics, Bill Phillips, in 1949. And it was called, the Phillips machine, it was called the MONIAC, the Monetary National Income Analog Computer, which is very catchy.
So I actually ought to explain, that's a joke. If you didn't get it.
I didn't get a joke? No, sorry, I've fallen for the joke. Right.
Because
we're going to leave that in. Right.
Electronic computing was in its infancy at the time Phillips built this machine. And just a year or two beforehand, or just a few years beforehand, in the US there'd been a machine called the ENIAC, which was the world's first programmable electronic computer.
Right.
And so I think it was an American academic, an economist called Abba Lerner, who coined this, the MONIAC. It's not the ENIAC, it's the MONIAC. And he came up with the acronym. I don't think it's one that Phillips himself ever used.
Right. But I guess it's stuck, yeah.
But it's stuck for
exactly
whatever
right.
crazy. And all I found is it's just terrible with spell checker, because it just means you're going to maniac every time you type it.
Exactly right. Yeah. And so this was a tool developed as a teaching device.
Yeah.
What was it teaching?
So, yeah, a teaching device, but also a learning device. Because for context here, Phillips was actually, he had just failed his sociology degree. Well, he'd got a third at LSE because he was an interesting character. He's like grown up on this remote farm in New Zealand, self-taught plumbing skills. He was a qualified electrician, so he had all these kind of very physical skills, which he put to great use when he was a prisoner of war in World War II. He spent several years as a prisoner of war in the Far East. Afterwards, he ended up in London at the LSE, where he was studying sociology. I think some people suggest because he was interested in the way that prisoners had organised themselves in camp and so on. But it didn't really grab him. He realised that the academic study of sociology wasn't really that exciting, and he wasn't doing very well as a mature student. And they did some economics modules where he got quite interested in economics, and then realised that for himself to understand a lot of this economic theory, he himself started to think about it in terms of plumbing metaphors. And some of his early undergraduate essays have got sketches of like the economy as like pipes and tanks, and like kind of like hydraulic things, which makes sense, doesn't it? Because
systems
when we
flow
talk about
and
money in terms of liquidity all the time,
that's right.
Liquid, cash flow, all that sort of stuff. So he kind of started sketching this stuff out, and then started to think, well, look, I think we can build this as a machine, right? And that would help me understand it. And he met up with an economist who was a little bit ahead of him at LSE called Walter Newlin, who helped him refine thinking about what the physical model of that would look like. And then he failed. He got his third in the summer of 1949, and instead spent most of his time not studying sociology, but building this machine in his landlady's garage in Croydon. We've got a photo of it. It's absolutely crazy because they're still wearing their sort of their army surplus clothes and so on in this Croydon garage. But they built this machine in the summer of 1949, and then amazingly, he convinced some very, very senior economists at LSE, like future Nobel laureate style economists, to say, can I come to your prestigious economics seminar and demonstrate a physical model of the economy that you can control? And they let him do it. And I think everyone turned up to have a laugh, and he switched it on and it worked. And everyone was like, oh my gosh. And so he went from failed sociology student to chair of professor of economics at LSE in about 8 years, which is pretty
incredible.
Good going.
Yeah. I mean, as you said, what an interesting fella. When did you first come across this device then? What was your sort of touch point for this?
So I was aware of this device. I've been at the FT nearly 10 years now, and I knew about it before I joined the FT. I remember reading about it in a couple of places, that there'd been interesting articles about this machine. I think in particular, there'd been a lot of coverage in Cambridge when the professor of engineering there restored the machine that they had in Cambridge. And And I remember reading about this thinking, this is an amazing machine. Like, I mean, I still haven't seen a digital model of the economy that works as well as this thing does. And it's 75 years old. And the only problem was trying to get to see one in action, because I confirmed this as part of the research for the piece. I think there were only 14 or 15 ever built. It wasn't a big money maker for him back in the day, because building these machines was a big undertaking. But only 3 of those are working. The one in Cambridge, one in Istanbul, and one in Wellington.
Oh, in New Zealand, right? Yeah,
in New Zealand, where they've got one out there. But it's very rare. And I mean, for something that's been designed as such as an interactive computer, which it really is, it's designed for you to pull things around so you can see what that does to the flow of money around the economy. It's all behind glass cabinets. And when it is demonstrated, it is just that, it's demonstrated. Students can't get hands-on with it. And what I liked about Philips's original kind of design for the device was that really you would just get students down to the front of the class from the lecture theatre and say, right, you be the Bank of England governor, and you be the chancellor, and you run the economy. And so, like, you know, it struck me that there was always scope to revisit this thing and kind of tell its story, if you see what I mean.
But tell its story also in the context of unlock it for more people to experience and to take part in and to enjoy. Now, again, perhaps for the audio listeners, the way that you've described this and the way that we'll show the footage later is basically a physical Sankey diagram.
Yes.
It's about flows, it's about entry points, it's about things joined together, but obviously in a physical environment it uses gravity, it uses liquid, it uses sluices. Is that the correct terminology?
Sluices and weirs. And it also uses a pump. So it isn't electronic, but there is an electric pump, which in the first version, Philips got from an old, it was Army RAF surplus. It was an electric pump from a Lancaster bomber, I think, that pumps this water around the economy. And it's exactly that. So what this machine does is it pumps water around this machine, and there are all sorts of interactive checkpoints on it that allow you to change where and how the money is routed. So you change tax rates and adjust consumption rates and change imports and exports, and all of the time it's instantly recalibrating how the economy is functioning according to your inputs. I mean, as a data viz enthusiast as well, it's just pure gold. The machine itself has got 2 plotters on the top of it, which in real time traces out time series charts of what's happening to national income, what's happening to imports and exports, what's happening to interest rates. And I'm looking at this all the time thinking, this was 1949. This is just absolutely, no one had ever seen anything like this, particularly. And what Philips had written about this, which I think is very interesting for students of data viz, was at the time electronic computing was in its infancy, and it did not have a graphical method. It's amazing to us to think of a time when computers didn't have a graphical method associated with them. But at the time, we're talking about sort of punch cards and very primitive kind of outputs from electronic computing. Whereas Philips wrote in his write-up of this project, he's aware of electronic computing, but this allowed him to see, it was really important, he said, from a learning perspective, to see the whole system in one view, right? And I think that's amazing, because that's where the Sankey equivalency comes from. It is like a living, breathing Sankey diagram where you can see the interplay between stocks and flows resolve in front of you in real time. It's the ultimate physical data viz.
But also, and what I love about these captured changes, it records what's happened. And at what point. And I guess what you can then do is log, well, I changed that to that, so that, so that's the effect that has. So it's a real time, but it's also a historical record of a recent
It's exactly
adjustments.
That. And interestingly, with our project, our first kind of launch, the launch version of the project replicates the original machine faithfully. But we were realizing while we were doing that we could be queuing up all sorts of interesting additions for further down the line. And that included things like, could we automatically annotate those time series plots with the interventions you made, for example? And we started to get excited about that, but also realized, look, let's do the first thing first. But then you start to realize this sort of very physical form lends itself very well to that sort of stuff, right? Absolutely.
So at this point in the video, myself and Obina will be going down to the Science Museum this afternoon. Okay, so welcome to the Science Museum and the Mathematics Wing. And we've walked through and immediately seen the glory of the original How the Economy Works machine. So here we've got a small sort of plinth for the description. You've got a relatively primitive interactive, although it's got some nice sound. And I think it's interesting how we can imagine from looking at that how a more, or perhaps less ambitious approach to this project might have looked. And then we've got the machine itself in all its glory and splendour. And having now seen the VR device, although we won't have talked about it much yet in the episode, I can say it is an incredibly faithful recreation. Because you get a sense of the material, you get a sense of the weight and the heft and the hydraulics and the movement and the residue of usage. We can see here that it's quite not so much damage, but it's got wear and tear. It's not been used for many years. You can see the residue of previous usage. I love the details of the manufactured by and the real sort of almost steampunk buttons and switches and just physical interactive devices. And yeah, it's one of those things that makes you wonder how on earth he even conceived of this back in 1949 with limitations of materials and technology. But obviously the guy had experience, so it wasn't something that was alien to him, but no, it's wonderful. That's the context of the machine, which is brilliant in its own right. But we need to move on to why you've done what you did with it and to it, because you've joined the FT around 2016, and at that point, is there an itch that needs scratching about doing something with this now that you've got this new arena to perform in a more kind of FT environment rather than the ONS before that?
It's a good question. So I think it probably sits in two places. One is, I think I always had sort of remembered that this was a thing that I wanted to have a look at some stage in the future. And I think somewhere in the back of my mind, I was thinking, well, the FT's job is to explain the connected economy, right? Like that. That's kind of one of the reasons why I read it. So it felt to me like somewhere in here there was going to be a very FT project to tease out. But kind of thinking about where to even start with that was difficult. And I guess one of the things that really was the starting point for that was Bob Hazlitt in my team. Turns out independently was also a big fan of the original Philips machine. He was very excited and interested in doing something that would allow us to create a digital version of it. And I remember we had a conversation where at one point Bob said, well, I've been thinking about getting into D3 and doing a bit of coding, because Bob's background was originally in sort of technical illustration and so on, and kind of art. But he's a very strong visual journalist of all sorts, really. He's a great data viz person as well. But Bob said, I'm thinking that I could do something in D3. We could have a go at creating it. And I remember thinking, well, for your first coding project, Bob, this would be quite the ask.
You've skipped past Hello World.
Exactly that. And and at that time, Bob went off to Cambridge University to see the restored version there. He spoke to the engineer at Cambridge, Alan McRoby, explained what he was attempting to do. I think Alan had heard that sort of talk before. People were sort of saying, I would love to do a digital version of this. How's that actually going to work? But Bob sort of really got his head around understanding how the machine was actually working. What was it doing? And to do that, you've got to get your head around the basic economic model at the heart of this machine, which is something called the ISLM model. And amazingly, as we can see, Bob got a basic version of this working, right? And I say basic because it wasn't really, it was working in principle. You could switch it on, it would start flowing particles around the system. You could adjust all of the sliders that are present on the original machine, and you can see you get this little readout and kind of display. So we were sort of semi-excited at this time. Well, quite excited because welcome to the world of coding, Bob. Like, you can do amazing things with
Project
code.
1 complete.
So this is great. And at the time, I remember talking to Tim Harford, who's the undercover economist at the FT. He writes a regular spot in the FT Weekend magazine. And I remember talking to Tim about this machine and said, hey, Tim, we're attempting this digital version of the Moniac. Are you interested in working with us on, if we can get this working, do something with it? And he was tremendously enthusiastic. He'd written about Philips before, was a massive fan of what the machine was trying to do, all that sort of stuff. And so this is like 2016, back into 2016, I think. And we were had got to this point, and then it stalled for one very obvious reason, which was this machine is 7 foot tall. Right? I mean, it's if you when you go to see it this afternoon, you'll get this sense of, oh my gosh, this is a beast of a machine. It's a really the physicality of it as well when it's actually under operation is amazing. Not just what it looks like, but what it sounds like.
You describe the sound as something that is a real part of the texture of it.
This water, when this pump kicks in, you get to see it, and there's some magic associated with it. Like when you switch the original machine off, you can hear all of the water drain away out of the economy, and everyone was just, when we were in Cambridge listening to this, I was part of the project. It was just magic, absolutely magic. And so the thing that killed it for us really was most of the FT audience is now accessing our content on 3-4 inch screens. And it felt to me like we couldn't do justice to the experience of the original machine. Even if you could somehow shoehorn in the interactive elements into this space, it would be incredibly difficult to create something that did justice to what Philips was trying to do.
Because if you think about that kind of metaphor that I often repeat on these shows, the smallify or simplify. Both of those are doing disservice.
They do.
To the original.
And actually, this is completely unrelated, but happened at the same time. I think I went to a conference, a DataViz conference. What was the one that used to happen? All the one that Tableau used to support. What was it called? Tapestry.
Oh yes, Tapestry.
Tapestry was in Colorado one year, and I remember going there and doing a talk about what we were doing at the FT with DataViz. And also on the panel that day was Nick Souzanis, who's an amazing character who delivered his PhD thesis on sort of philosophy as a comic book.
Right.
And it's an amazing thing. I think you can buy the whole book on Amazon now because it's just such a work of art. But I talked on DataViz, Nick talked about his comic book, but we both got essentially the same question at the end from the audience, which was, what does it look like on mobile? And I did the usual defensive thing about, like, we try to make it look as good as possible and preserve as much of what we get, all this sort of stuff. And Nick was having none of it. He said, why should I adapt my medium to something that could be not much more than a sort of transient piece of technology? Why should I have to reduce my whole thing to a 3-inch screen when you could be using projected displays in 10 years' time that makes my work look dated? I'd rather design for a medium that is better suited for my work. That's what he said. And again, that stuck with me as well. I kind of thought, yes, because actually in the world of data visualization, we're becoming increasingly kind of accepting of the fact that we're being boxed into a 3 or 4 inch screen to do our work. And I don't want to sort of underplay how democratizing mobiles have been.
Of course.
For unlocking information to wide audiences. That's absolutely, obviously, a really important reason why mobile remains incredibly important. But it struck me that if we were never looking beyond that, we wouldn't be getting prepared for what's coming next and what's going to happen next. So we paused this project reluctantly. I kind of thought, look, we'll come back to this when it's time. And from time to time over the years, I remember seeing other people discover the Philips story and tell this remarkable story of how this machine came to bear, always thinking, but no one's actually showing you the machine. No one's actually, the star of the machine, yes, it's Philips, but the star of the show is Philips, but it's also the actual machine is amazing. Right? Like, and no one had really captured kind of that sense of it. So it was really on pause until last year when
this is 7 years later. This
7
is
years
on ice for
later,
7 years.
Yeah, which I guess in the context of a 75-year-old computer is an acceptable delay.
Only
Maybe
10%,
I don't know.
yeah.
But like, so it was on pause for 7 years, and then last year, I mean, we've been working at the FT with Infosys as a sort of technology partner to explore new uses of technology and things that we can leverage, and we've always been looking out for kind of doing different things. And the first project we delivered with them was something called the Climate Game, which was sort of gamifying. Can you get to net zero as a sort of minister for future generations?
And those pieces, and correct me if I'm wrong, I mean, you'll know internally, but my sense from the outside is that those pieces are extremely popular.
Really
when
popular.
you get people to put stuff in,
yeah,
put themselves in, play around, can I beat the system? Can I win something?
Yeah, so it's game as learning experience.
Yeah.
And also, I think particularly for something like climate change, in the case of that project, it was about learning about the long-term consequences of decisions that you make today.
Sure.
Right, like, so if you play that game, the idea is you play it multiple times, play it with different strategies, see the result that it has or the outcome every time. So it was quite nice. I mean, that was a collaboration with Infosys, led on the FT side by my colleague Sam Joyner and our visual storytelling team. So that was the first project that we delivered, and I think it went down quite well. But I think we then wanted to move on to do something that was much more forward-looking in terms of genuinely experimental technology. And so then that's when things started to fall into place. Last summer 2023, Apple did this keynote about Vision Pro.
This was it July time?
Yeah,
July last year.
July 2023, I think. And they didn't launch it then. They just announced it, and they said it's going to be it's going to be available in early 2024.
Yeah.
And I mean, it was really interesting because we do cover at the FT, you know, we don't do things like kind of tech product reviews, but we do try to keep readers informed about emerging technology trends and what that means for them, their lives.
Yeah, these are enabling devices out there.
Stuff. And so, I mean, it was really interesting watching that release, looking at the genuinely sort of polarized reaction to it. And in the one corner, you had people sort of saying, this is crazy because it costs £3,500. It's too cumbersome. This is not new. There's already headsets from other suppliers. Yeah. And another group of people saying, but look at the specs. You know, it's got 23 million pixels in the displays. It's got spatial surround sound.
Yeah.
It's basically got an M2 processor on board.
Right.
So you're basically wearing a Mac on your eyeballs.
And actually on that, because you told me that Apple call this something, spatial computing.
Yes, right. They call it spatial computing, which, again, I was a bit skeptical of, in that everybody else calls it, extended reality, virtual reality, mixed reality, take your pick about what particular definition you use. But they don't call it a headset. I think that's probably because that's probably not the final form factor that I imagine a project like this to take. But they call it spatial computing. Now, to a GIS nerd, when you put spatial on the front of the word computer, you're kind of thinking, oh, hello, we can do all sorts of things here. So, I mean, I kind of looked at it and thought, well, this looks amazing. It will obviously be a slow burner because this is not like the iPhone or the iPad where suddenly everyone's going to have one in their pocket. But it does represent potentially a change in the paradigm of how you interact with computers and kind of interact, because the Apple headset relies a lot on technology like eye tracking, and it's got lots of cameras to track gestures and stuff. So the way you interact with it is very different. And looking at those specs and what they were saying you would be able to do with it, I instantly thought, aha. No one else is thinking about this, but I'm thinking it's a great way of making a 75-year-old analog computer.
And not least, as you said, because maybe the thing that held you back until this point was the spatial dimensions of this piece. So as you say, spatial computing.
Exactly.
The antenna sticking up. Yeah.
And so that was when we had a session, a planning meeting with our Infosys partners at the time in India in August. Where I kind of said, well, look, I've got one idea here that might sound a bit crazy, but hear me out. And
Here's my moonshot.
Here was my pitch, right? But amazingly, it was so enthusiastically received across both sides of the piece as like something that we really should do for a variety of reasons. And also because in terms of exploring tech, Infosys, we worked with a design agency that's a part of Infosys called Wong Doody, who also had access to a company that specialized in 3D CGI, based in Berlin. And so we thought, well, this for several reasons would be great. One, to have a very, very specific reason to test out spatial computing.
Yes.
What's it for?
Yeah.
it struck me that it would be just a really good idea to have a very, very faithful replica of the original Philips machine. Right? Like, I just think there are...
Well, actually, can we just explore that a little bit? Because you, in a sense, you create more problems for you. You create more challenges, not problems. By having to preserve the same nuts and bolts, the same labels, the same physical restrictions, you're giving yourself more of a job. It might be a more rewarding outcome as it is.
Yeah.
But were you not tempted to think, let's just completely revamp this?
I think there was one direction we could have taken it, and I think it probably would have been the wrong thing to do given where we were. And I mean, I think one of the things that was really great about this project is we obviously already had Bob's, like, it was great to, as part of the pitch, say this thing could work as a digital experience. But also the connection that Bob had made at Cambridge University, Professor Alan McRobie, who's not a professor of economics, he's a professor of engineering, who's structural engineering. I mean, I think he was involved in fixing the wobbly Millennium Bridge here, right? Like, he's a structural engineer who was fascinated by this machine that he'd seen in the economics department at Cambridge because of just how ingeniously Philips had solved all the hydraulics challenges to replicate an economy. And so he restored that machine and was massive. He's been demonstrating it for 20 years, and he's a massive fan of Philips and the machine. So the moment we went back to him and said, we really think we can do this now, a lot of it was dependent on him saying, all right, you know, you can come along and, you know, take measurements from the original machine, understand more about how it works, all that sort of stuff. And so because Alan was so accommodating, it made it a natural thing to just celebrate the original machine and to try and capture as much of that in as detail as possible. And also, I would have sold it to myself, I think, if it had been just, here's the original machine and you can play with it. But the other thing that was really important is that I was still seeing people write about why this machine, although the underlying economic model is no longer the sort of the model that you would be using to do this sort of thing, the way that it visualizes and explains the basic flow of money around the economy, something called the circular flow of income, is still on the A-level syllabus. And so I had this sort of sense that, actually, you know what, we could make this kind of proper historically faithful working and still make it relevant and contextual to today's A-level students. Right? So that would be a good thing, because we've got a very active schools network at the FT, teachers who write lesson plans around FT materials. And so we sense checked with them, if we build this machine and we put the circular flow of income into it as a lesson, would that be interesting? And they were like, yes, that would be really good. And then also the other thing, just going back to your point about why not rebuild the whole thing, is we kind of thought, well, in doing that, we would learn more about how to create complex systems and visualizations like this, so that you could start to use it in the future to do other stuff, more sophisticated economic models.
Plus, you always need constraints to a degree.
Yeah, I think so.
Because then it creates innovation, it creates...
And I think the original machine is such a piece of innovation that's never been revisited. It was worth recapturing. I mean, we did, going back to how faithful that should be, I think was really interesting, because the original machine is 7 foot tall. When you've got a mobile phone, that's a problem. Like, when you've got a spatial computer, it's not. Your question is really, how big should we make it? We could make it so that it's got a scalable interface, so I could sit it on the desktop, or, you know, I could make it 3 stories tall.
Take a lift.
What should we do with it? But that was really great from a design perspective. It gives you a very different set of challenges and decisions to make. And so what we decided to do was to keep it exactly the same size as the original, for a couple of reasons. One, because the original has got an amazing user interface baked directly into the physical form of the object, which probably wouldn't respond well to being upsized or downsized. And therefore, if we'd have changed that physicality, everything else from the machine would have to be readjusted and recalibrated.
Plus, I guess the thing is, it's not broken as a device. It doesn't need improving. What needs improving is the access to it.
Exactly.
And the use of it, which is what you're fundamentally unlocking. So
I think with 3 of them original machines still working, that means that even, like, as people were saying, but Apple Vision Pro hasn't even launched yet, the device isn't out there, you know, why restrict it to just Vision Pro? Well, I mean, there were 2 reasons for that. One is, I felt like the specs of what we could explore in Vision Pro were way ahead of anything else out there. We really wanted to, if we were going to experiment with technology, we should push as hard as we can at what we would see as the sort of leading edge. And secondly, the sort of the sales of the headset, I mean, by Apple standards, they're not approaching iPhone or iPad levels, because it's not really that device per user type thing.
Yeah.
But if Apple have only sold 500,000 or whatever in the first year of launch, well, that's more than 3 machines around the world.
Exactly right.
So we kind of extend that out. Yeah.
So you talked there about the partners, Infosys and Wongdoody and Alan McRoby. And at this point, you're now essentially the data gathering stage. So in normal data viz projects, we'd be looking at, downloading from a system or getting a spreadsheet of values, but this is more of a physical measuring process. And we've got some clips here of the team kind of in front of the machine. Can you just talk in sort of broad terms about how you got all these dimensions and measurements, and also the material, the rendering, the look and feel?
So this is really good. I love this photo for so many reasons, because it just captures, when you say people are into a project, like
yes,
they're literally into the project. That's Bob in the lower left-hand corner, kneeling and getting into the machine's cabinet. That's Alan McRoby with his back to us in the green jumper, and then that's 2 of our kind of Wongdoody colleagues on the right there, Dennis on the furthest right. So we went to Cambridge, first of all, to introduce the project to Alan McRoby, ask him to demonstrate it to us and allow us to measure it. And that measurement consisted of very old school tape measure, like let's get our rulers out and write down some measurements, but also LiDAR scans, really detailed texture captures. So it was a real combination of sort of new and old methods to come.
Did you have to unscrew it and take it apart and get into the inner workings?
Not particularly, because what it does is, it's a very honest machine, is that it exposes itself as part of, there's no panels to take apart. The whole thing is like this crazy
There's no curtain behind which
it's like a mid-century sort of steampunk hybrid perspex metal sort of thing, and you can walk all the way around it. It's a highly sort of physical environment, and so. But, so the measuring the physical elements of it was one part of it. But the other thing then was understanding how it actually works and how it hooked together. And actually, Alan McRoby told us that was actually his most difficult thing when he was restoring the machine, not as an economist, but as an engineer, trying to understand how on earth has Philips got this thing to work? Right? And he described it to me as real Heath Robinson, like that sort of like fishing rods, hooking, and just these amazing kind of contraptions that Heath Robinson illustrations famously sort of depicted. That it was like that, and he stepped us through some of that. But the other thing that we found is that there is a field called system dynamics that some people might be familiar with, is the field of system dynamics, which is about understanding stocks and flows and lags in systems as a kind of science. And systems dynamics enthusiasts have written academic papers about this machine, because they think it's like one of the very first true system dynamic models that have kind of been physically rendered. And so what was lovely about that is basically these academic papers had
these like instruction manuals.
Absolutely. They had abstracted everything that was going on in this machine into things that you could resolve into functional form, into kind of like a code-based form. And crucially, with also tests of what the real machine would be displaying relative to an electronic implementation of it. So those papers, as well as the physical measurements, meant that you had both the physicality of the original machine plus also the underlying logic of what it was trying to do.
Yes. And then also the LiDAR, which collects the material. And what I loved what you described earlier, so the one that we're going to see in the Science Museum is to a degree not sanitized, but it's clean, it's unused to a certain degree.
Yeah.
This has been used. It's got the bumps and bruises.
This is battle worn. If you look at it, there's like cracks in some of the perspex. There's lime scale everywhere. It's like been used all over the time. Alan McRoby said it stopped working during the pandemic. It sprang some leaks that they had to come back and fix and all this sort of stuff. So actually, that was another thing for us, is that in terms of historical preservation, these machines are quite fragile.
Yes.
There's no guarantee that the 3 working now are always going to be working.
True,
capturing this in a sort of a longer life version, I think, is really important.
Like an archival benefit, So we've got the original, we've got your motivation for it, we've got the gathering of the information. So how did the next step proceed in terms of turning this into a thing? Because again, this is new technology in terms of the output, but I guess the underlying 3D modelling and simulating environments is not itself new.
Yeah.
But it's developing, I guess.
It's new for this. I mean, the way that I tried to explain it was that what you're doing is taking technology that you would normally use for producing Hollywood CGI clips or car adverts, basically.
Yeah.
You know, like the driverless car that's driving across the top of a building.
Yeah.
Right? Like, that's all CGI. Right?
Yeah.
And the expertise that was at Wong Doody in this space would do stuff like that as their general
day job.
And so when we said, well, how about doing that with this? They were all like, yay, that sounds great. And so what you're seeing here, this is the 3D digital twin, which was produced by our Wong Doody colleagues in Maya. So if people are familiar with that, so Maya is what you would normally use for building that sort of 3D CGI elements. But also texturally, it's amazingly faithful to the original, right? And that's because they've used Adobe Surface Painter to help with textures and kind of finishings. And again, for us, I think it was really interesting. This stage in the project, Vision Pro hadn't been launched, so we didn't really know how faithful this version of the digital twin would be able to be rendered when we were doing the final version out in Vision Pro. These were the sort of unknowns we were talking about. But the moment we saw this Maya model with the texture on it, I mean,
that must have been a point of excitement when you see that.
And the first versions of this that we saw didn't have the pink water in it. It was just, here's the machine. And even at that point, Bob and myself were looking at each other and thinking, well, I'm glad we've gone away from the original version we had with D3, because this is showing you that physicality really, really well. And we couldn't wait to get it into a sort of physical form. And then, so this is at the back end of last year, this model came out available to us. And so we talked about doing a teaser version to end our phase 1 project, which would be to do an iPad version of the app.
Right.
With some basic functionality in it. So you could show the flow of water through it in some capacity. And we demoed that. I demoed that in Davos in January of this year, where there's a lot of economists turn up at Davos, right? And a lot of them are fans of things like the Philips machine. So
was that a full room of?
If you go, one of my social media profiles has got like a picture of me in a boxy like room with a window view taken from the outside. That's it,
right?
And so I plugged in this iPad into a big screen, because again, even though an iPad screen is bigger than a mobile phone screen, for me it's still not an interface that's going to work for the full machine. So we got it onto a big screen, and I basically used the iPad as a remote control and stepped people through a couple of economic principles that we've got working inside it. And the reaction was like great. People were like, no, I thought people might say, what on earth are you doing? But that wasn't the case. People were like, this is really, really, really interesting. There's going to be a lot of economists that are very happy with this project. So came back from Davos, and then it was like, right, now how do we really turn it into a proper thing? I think Vision Pro launched in February in the US. There were a couple of headsets that Wong Doody got hold of early on from bringing them back from the US. That was the first chance that we had to then. We went to Cambridge in April, back to Cambridge, and showed Alan McRobie the dry model in Vision Pro. So you could just sit the dry model in the room and walk around it. And even at that point, Alan was getting emotional. He was like, oh my God, this is amazing. I said, well, wait till you actually see it working. And I think at that point, people were thinking, well, how is that going to work? What does that interaction layer look like? So I think that was our sort of next thing. We had two real problems to solve. One was kind of what do you present to the user? And two, let's get the actual system working properly. So the flow of pink water through the veins of the Maya model all happened in Unity.
And we should mention the pink water.
Yes.
It's not an FT house style necessarily. It works well, but...
This is amazing. This is the stuff that we found as we were researching this project. So the original machine was demonstrated with pink water to help the stocks and flows stand out. As you can see, actually, from this model, it stands out more with dyed water. And the story is, back in the day at LSE, the only people who didn't like that were the cleaners, because the tanks would regularly overflow and spill like dyed pink water all over the lecture floor. But yeah, it genuinely was pink. So we were sort of, on brand for the FT straight from the off. The other thing we found is that the economics seminar that Philips originally presented to back in the day was the Lionel Robbins seminar. And Robbins ended up being chairman of VFT for 10 years.
Right.
And his last ever working day was spent in this building that we're in today. There's like this crazy historical...
It lines up perfectly.
Nothing.
Yeah.
So, all of that was going on. And so modelling the flow of pink water through the thing, that was all done in Unity. There's a package in Unity called Polyspatial, which now handles the conversion in and out of Apple Vision Pro, which the Wong Doody team, I think that was the first time they'd used it. So for them as well, it was like a big experiment.
So there's a secondary benefit in all this, which is, breaking new ground in all your collective learnings of how you use these tools.
Just learning by doing is definitely the ethos of both this machine and also creating the digital version. I think everyone was very...
And also the sound.
Yes.
And that's a really important texture of this.
We loved that. We recorded the original sound when we were there in April. Even to the point where you hear the water run out of the system when you switch it off. So everyone was like, keep quiet. It's still coming out. So the sound really makes people, when you're wearing the full thing, and the kind of immersive experience is really helped by the sound. So that was all going nicely. And then the next really big thing, like I say, was this kind of user interface element, which is, when you look at things like the Apple Developer Guidelines talking about how to create a convincing spatial computing user interface layer, you're talking about different metaphors for interfaces because there's no mouse, there's no cursor, there's no trackpad. It's all eye tracking and gesture movement. So how should that translate into your interaction with the machine? And we'd kind of toyed, I think, at one of our, we were doing kind of weekly catch-up meetings between the two teams to work out how this was going to happen. We kind of threw out this idea that we should put another layer of user interface on the machine. One of the things I love about the machine is Philips has designed that so that you can look at it and understand where the economy is at any one point in time just by looking at the machine.
Yes, yeah.
And all of the controls are built in so that you can see their state of play.
And they're also, the affordances are clear.
Exactly.
You know exactly what, are you going to roll something? Are you going to slide something?
Exactly. Yeah. And so we thought, well, look, let's try and use the built-in interface elements in the digital twin.
Yeah.
And we'll plug that directly into the eye tracking and gesture control of Apple Vision Pro. And at first, when you try it, you think, this is really weird because I'm dragging something that isn't physically there.
But feels like
it. As soon as you've done it for more than a minute or two, it feels very, very natural.
And I should say, I've not yet played with it. I'm going to play with it later, but I wanted to preserve my naivety of this. So you can see Alan's joy if you're watching the video. Well, but I'm going to experience it later on. But
it was crazy because, I mean, all this time we'd had it without Apple Vision Pro, but then finally we got like a test flight app ready to look. And I'd got hold of my own Vision Pro in London, and I picked it up in Covent Garden, got home late one day. I was really tired. You know what it's like setting up a new device from scratch. You're thinking, I have to go through all my iCloud stuff. Can I be bothered? And I thought,
connect to the Wi-Fi.
Yeah, exactly. And I thought, oh no, I'm going to give it a try. So I was in my kitchen downstairs, and I put this thing on and just clicked my fingers, and this 7-foot Philips machine just drops, glittering and glistening, into my living room. And honestly, I don't think I've had a joyful reaction to technology in the way that I have had when this thing just dropped into my house. And I realised I could take it anywhere. I went into the garden with it. I put it in the garden, right? Like, it's really fun to just realise that this is something that you can detach from your regular idea of how to interact with technology. So by then we were starting to get really excited. It was like, okay, let's see this through to the end. So then the final thing in the development of the project really was, we wanted to create some educational materials to go alongside the machine. So our goal was to make the machine so that it's running as faithfully as possible to the original. And then you can construct some lesson plans around it to explain what's going on. So in the app, right now, there's like an onboarding lesson, and then there's one lesson about this circular flow of income I mentioned. So I wrote those materials while Wong Doody were finessing what was happening on the Vision Pro side of things. And at the same time also, I was working with the FT's magazine editors, because we'd pitched this to say, we've got something really interesting. I'd kept in touch with Tim Harford. He agreed to write the historical backstory of Philips and the machine and how that all came to play. I said, we'll get Tim to do the historical stuff. I'll write a piece about the digital reworking of it. we'll make it a compelling package, and we'll make it front page of the magazine the same weekend that we put the app available for free download in the Vision Pro store. And amazingly, like trying to herd kittens, that all actually worked really, really nicely.
And there's things like there's elections taking place and there's budgets taking place in the background. The day job is still a thing. But,
it is, but it was great because actually all of that was relatively painless because almost like we'd done all of the hard work in researching the original. You know, I'm not going to say the piece wrote itself. It didn't, but it just flowed, just like the water in the machine. The whole thing flowed. And so, in September, we published it into the App Store. We published the magazine piece. We've made it free to read, actually, which for us was really important to try and spin the sort of educational benefit of having this machine and what extended reality or spatial computing could do for that. We've had lots of discussions with Apple all along the way. They've been very interested to see this piece develop because they see education and experiential learning like this, that you can just pull things and see what happens. They see that as a really big selling point of having this kind of spatial computing platform. So all of that was tremendously positive. It's also prepped me for some very unusual things because, like you say, it's our first extended reality app that we've published. And I remember talking with some people at the FT, said, right, well, of course, you're going to be the support for it. So, like, if anyone has any questions about it, it's coming to you, right? And I was like, well, okay, but what possible questions could they have?
Weekend helpline sort of guy.
My favourite one is I mentioned earlier that one of the things about Apple Vision Pro that's really interesting in how we built the app is it's got automatic plane detection on it. So it can detect flat surfaces, which is great because that means basically when you're running the app, you can just look at the floor and look around and then just say, right, I want it here, and it'll drop in. The first support request I had was from somebody in California who had accidentally attached it upside down to his ceiling in his condo. And it was so far away up on the roof of it that the user interface was too small for him to reset it to come back down again. And so I've got this lovely screenshot that he sent me of this 75-year-old analog water computer stuck upside down to the ceiling of his condo in California. And I felt, our work is done.
Yes.
This is the problem that I wanted. Because of course what was happening is he was looking at the ceiling and the plane detection detected there's a flat surface there and it kind of pinged to it, which was easy enough to resolve once I stepped him through it. But it made me realise this is no longer your typical IT support desk call because everything's changed a little bit with it.
No, I mean, that's wonderful. I think it probably takes us on to just some sort of reflections, really, because it's clearly, as you've articulated, it's clearly a piece that has brought joy to you. And, this thing that you mentioned there, which has stuck with me since you first mentioned it, there's a lot of cynicism around lots of aspects of tech, maybe for lots of good reasons, but this felt like we were talking a while back about tomorrow's world. Younger people, ask your parents. But that sense that you'd watch TV on a Thursday and you said these new devices, and it was like that excitement, and perhaps this is a rare occasion perhaps that you've had that.
I mean, I think technology's been so important to the development of our field in terms of data viz that I think it would be really difficult to completely ignore the progress that like computers have offered with things like data handling and all the things that we know that we rely on it for. But I also feel like some of the reaction against technology has come in the form of, the move towards more physical data visualization, Georgia Lupi, Stephanie's work. That for me, this was a real chance to take data back into a more interesting, more tactile space. So it's not physical, but it's near physical.
Yes.
Right? And it's certainly physical enough when you try it to realize that you're no longer looking at charts, right? You're looking at data expressed in some other form that is very, very sort
it's
of
a different form of abstraction.
Yeah.
But it's closer to reality than not, perhaps.
And then this is like really my favourite real moment of the whole project. One other character that I haven't mentioned throughout this project that became a really important thing is we did a launch event at the London School of Economics because we thought we should go back to where it all started. So that's where we did the official launch event was there. And one of the people that I got in touch with at the London School of Economics was someone who'd written a lot about Philips in the past, was a economics professor called Nicholas Barr. And if you look, quick Google, you'll see he's written a lot about this machine. So when I got in touch with him, he was instantly enthused about what we were doing and said, long overdue for this digital twin. Yes, let's see what you've done. And, he's been at the LSE, I think, for over 50 years. Right? I think he has worked there entirely through that period from being a student to where he is now, which is, late career, very late career. I hope he doesn't mind me saying that. But I think the only time he took 2 years out to go work in Washington for the World Bank at one point.
But still working,
other than that, LSE the whole time.
Yeah.
And he was telling me about when he was a student, there was a soiree one evening at LSE where he said the usual thing happened. All of the senior people gathered together in one group, and then it was a very hierarchical soiree, as these things were. And he said there was one guy standing on his own. He went over to have a chat with him, small, nervy sort of person, I think. He was sort of saying, and to get the conversation going, Nick said to him, I hear there's this crazy machine here that it's like a water computer of the economy. And this person said, yeah, I built it. And so Nick had a direct connection to Bill Phillips. Bill Phillips actually signed off his PhD, and he was like his early LSE mentor. So the day before launch day, I brought Vision Pro over to Nick, and I gave him the tour, put on the goggles, gave him, and I was really worried. I thought, Nick's eye is going to be up to doing this. It's all a new environment. But Nick's like a tech whiz. He knows what he's doing with a computer. So he put it on, and I just watched him. I took loads of photos of him doing this. And he was just smiling the whole time that he was using it. He was smiling it. And he took it off, and he just said, Bill Phillips would have loved this.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely loved this. And it was just a slight, I don't think he'd admit it, but I think his eye was slightly moist.
Yes,
he was it was this emotional reaction to seeing this thing come back to life in a way that no one could have dreamed about back in the day,
So you couldn't get any better
it's just
rewarding feedback
amazing.
than that, right?
So we had a panel session at the launch event, which was Nick, Mary Morgan, also from LSE, and I think she was the last person ever trained on the original machine as well, which is amazing. Amazing stuff. But also one of the Wong Doody developers who led the digital reworking, and I thought, what an amazing panel. It was just so lovely to have such a group of people on it. As I said, it was perfectly historical and forward-looking in that respect.
And again, just to sort of wrap up then, when we think back to the why, there's lots of whys that this thing has benefited from in terms of archiving, in terms of unlocking its usage, in terms of testing the development of new technology. What's its legacy now for you here at the FT? I'm not going to ask you for secrets of what's next or the next project that's in the pipeline, but what do you think this could lead to?
So, immediately when we put this much effort into, it was great to have the magazine package and to have a very compelling app that we could serve up as part of the magazine package. But if that was all it had achieved, that wouldn't be enough. But what we really want is for the app to now find its way into uses in an educational setting, just as the original machine did. And so rather than just turn to the next big app that we want to do, we want to get some more life out of this app. So we've been working with the Royal Economic Society, are very interested in doing some educational events. The Bank of England has got a museum that are thrilled. They want to get hold of a copy of this and do...
somewhere down there.
Just over there. Yeah. But we've got plans to do an event with them. There's also a plan to do an evening session at the Science Museum. I don't know if you've got the photo of the Science Museum model here, because this was such a lovely moment before launch where we got into the Science Museum before opening. Legally, they let us in. Yes, of course. Right? Legally, they let us in. But this is Bob standing next to the original machine they've got in the Science Museum and our machine next to it. And it was so lovely to see these things come together. And so we want to do an evening event at LSE in the new year as well. So we really want to push this as a thing that might be a museum piece, but is also still a relevant learning device for all sorts of
it's
reasons.
not time limited, is it? It isn't only relevant for September of this year.
Exactly, and we've already had people say, look, if economics was taught like this when I was a kid, I'd have paid a bit more attention. It's just pulling on stuff. It's like the way that lots of kids are interested in things. So we definitely want to do some more, we've paused development of the app while we see its reaction in the wild, and we're monitoring that. We've already been really pleased actually with how many people have kind of been involved in using it. Every time we turn up with one of these headsets at an event, like 50, 60 people have kind of gone through it.
Exactly right.
And used it. But in terms of what's next, I mean, I think if you go back to ft.com, the really interesting thing is at the same time this year, we've published the first interactive visual story that also includes an augmented reality element to it. And that was Ian Bott has created like an animated moving robotic dog as part of a story that we did on how robots are learning using AI.
Right, yeah.
And our visual storytelling team have done a great job of building that entirely in-house. Ian's modeled the robot. But again, just really interesting. If you look at that story on your phone, there's an option to go to the AR version of it. So you can scroll through the story, like a normal scrolly telling type story. But then you can click and it'll say, right, give me the AR dog. And you can hold your phone up and it gives you the screen of like the dog is there in the room. And you can kind of, it's absolutely fun. It's a hoot. But I tried the same thing. If you look at the same web page with Safari on Vision Pro, the dog can be sitting next to you while you're reading the article. And that's really crazy because it's spatial computing. You can walk around the dog. Right. While reading the web page, right? Like it's
and it can be in the peripheral as well.
Exactly. It's like it's a completely different experience. And so I think there is this element of we've really pushed this out by going full extended reality here and making this as far-reaching as possible. I don't think that instantly means that everything like this is now going to be a Vision Pro app.
No.
But you're starting to realize that asset types are going to become increasingly more fluid in stories, and that there are going to be all sorts of interesting opportunities to tell things in slightly different ways.
Yeah.
Right? And I think that's really, really interesting.
I think it is. And I think, as we've talked about before, kind of off camera, the possibilities of explaining complex phenomena, complicated technical phenomena like this does. It feels to me from the outside similar to the impact of Snowfall, when the New York Times released that, in terms of like that sort of scrolly storytelling, just a different way to bring, in that case, long form media to a wider audience. In this case, things that just otherwise just can't be accessed.
I mean, I think we talk about in data visualization a lot. We talk about sort of golden eras, right? Like, and if you look at what is it that makes like a golden era, it's usually associated with a period of really interesting experimentation and a departure from the norm. Yeah. Right? Like, so you go through...
And people building on those
and then
experiments,
they build on them, and then things move on, and then they pause for a bit and things stabilize and settle down, but then there's always something new that kind of comes along. And it feels to me that like that's what's exciting about this. It's not like everything now needs to be a 7-foot physical machine. Yeah. But the fact that you can, as one person at the FT said to me, so you've taken one crazy computer and put it inside another crazy computer. The fact that you have that flexibility to do that sort of stuff, I think means that, whoa, what comes next? Yeah. Right? What comes next? There's lots of new forms of experimentation that we can do. And certainly in terms of complex systems, I'd be thinking, well, look, what's the best method of teaching climate science to someone? Is it through a 4-inch screen? Or is it through something that they could be much more immersed and it kind of playful with? I think that's the other thing that's going to be really interesting. Playing as a form of learning doesn't necessarily just mean games. Yes, yeah. It means just all sorts
taking part
of
in something.
What can I do? Yeah.
Well, we're going to take part soon with this device, so we'll stick in the inserts for the video for that. But for now, Alan, thank you so much. What a brilliant project, what a fascinating story. Thank you for your time. And thank you for all the listeners and viewers so far. And see you all soon for another episode of Explore, Explain. Bye for now.
Thanks. So try the money machine. So FT money machine. Place the machine. And then, you saw Abina do it. So you just want to click, place the machine, and then look at the floor, not the ceiling. Maybe move it a bit closer to you. Just look. Oh, no, well, that will do. It's fine. It will still place, and then you can move it.
Oh, wow.
Sorry about the
Yeah. So if you look down at the base of the machine, you should get the grab handles come up when you walk close to it.
Do I just skip first?
Yeah, you can skip first. Yeah. If you walk up to the machine, you should get the grab handles appear. Yeah. There you are, and you can just pick it up and move it a bit closer towards you, and then just drop it and let it go. And there is the machine.
Wow. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's a good quality model, right? Like like I say, I got goosebumps when I first tried it in the, when I realised how much of the texture had come over with it. It was just extraordinary.
This is just not normal. I mean,
so you got your plots ready to go. So if you look at the Financial Times panel and just flip the on the machine, on the front of the machine,
sorry, yeah,
the little pump switch, just look at it and pinch. That's it.
There
we go.
Yeah.
And now you should be getting that spatial sound.
Yeah. The liquid moving, the flow effect of it.
They did an amazing job with that. There were so many different versions of that we looked at, and that's it. You're straight in. Pinch, look. I love the first thing I think you should do, that taxation slider in the top left, because I think you really get that sense of hydraulics as you're pulling it. Look at what's happening to that propensity card as you're dragging it. You get this real connection about what's going on in the machine and how it works.
And that's
interest rate, the top one, and then imports and exports on the bottom.
Oh, so yeah.
And that's national income. That's basically GDP on the left-hand side.
Is there any notion of almost like a snap to grid equivalent? If you're wanting to make this interaction,
so we've set it up as continuous. So it's the black. That's it. You got it. We thought let's keep it continuous
because it will be in real life.
Because it would be in real life, and also that's kind of how analog works.
Yeah,
analog doesn't work in discrete, snappable chunks, and it would break the analog sort of model. So the wheels, you look at them and pinch left to right, so you don't operate them as wheels at the moment. We haven't got the extra interaction on that. That's it. So you just drag it to the left and the right. Look.
Oh, that's so satisfying.
But the sound again makes a big
noise,
You're actually it's kind of clicking along on it.
I love the highlighter prompts for. I mean, obviously it's very video game inspired in that sense, but it's such a brilliant way to interact.
Yeah. And then if you wanted to experience, like maybe flick on the circular flow lesson, maybe. So that's the little mortarboard icon. Gives you a sense for sort of what guided learning looks like on that. This is very quick. It will take you 2 minutes. Welcome to our lesson on the circular.
He says AI generated voice.
AI generated voice, yeah. We auditioned several voices. Just double pinch.
Oh, sorry.
A new type of gesture. It's just a double tap. That's it.
Think of the water in our machine as all the money is on. Just like your page doesn't sit still for long. It flows around, changing hands and allowing the exchange of goods. Let's get the water moving.
So if you look at the machine now, there you go.
As the water it represents income. But also, some of this income must
Love that. Is it a cyan?
Yeah.
To contrast with the pink of the.
Yeah.
Was it the taxation?
There we are. It should light up there. Yeah, that one. So you just pinch and drag.
What's left after? Both income. On money. Will it depend on good or just the consumption slider? Let's very
Spend.
money and to the bank's loan funds, which businesses borrow. Just the investment expenditure slider and watch as companies bring into action.
The sound design is really good.
Mm.
If you look to the left on the panel at the same time, Andy, this is kind of giving you the stuff you would read in the A-level textbook.
Oh, I see. Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So it's quite interesting. It's like we thought you had to have some textual guide.
Yeah.
But the visual focus definitely has to be the machine.
Yeah. I love the pipe.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it? It's crazy that they had too much fun on the texturing. So there we go, double click.
Our economies flow changes. Watch how the simulating roller coaster.
There you go. And then, yeah, just a double pinch, I think, completes that lesson. So yeah, and now you're in free play mode. So this is just like flood your living room type of stuff. Yeah, go through it, Andy. You know you can.
Oh, it's just not. It's just not easy, is it? Like,
Have you tried that with dinosaurs? Eh?
Oh no.
that is. Yeah, that is. It doesn't feel normal to walk through a machine.
No.
That is immense. Absolutely immense.
Yeah. Well, I'm just. But like I say, it's been ages in the making. So it was so nice to get to a point where. So I've never been more excited about a weekend magazine packaging EFT because it was just like a total sum of team effort to get that over the line, and all of them in Germany were messaging us on the day saying this is amazing and like, we can do it.
That's brilliant.
So that's the money machine, Andy. If you just want to click on the gears icon and just restart it, because what we'll do is that will kill it in memory.
To see more information about today's episode, including some links to key sites and resources mentioned, please visit my website at visualizingdata.com. Here you'll also be able to find details about my book, information about my public and private training courses, as well as over a decade of blog posts. If you've enjoyed this series, please consider liking, subscribing and spreading the word. See you next time.